Hi, this is Martin Fowler, and you're listening to the Agile Uprising.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I have locked Jay Hershko into a basement and not allowed him to get out, or maybe his wife has. One of the two of us has locked him in. I don't know why, but we're not letting him out. So I am the host of this evening's podcast, and I am joined by my fellow board members, Paul Elia. Hello, Paul.
Hey, and you are?
So I'm so sorry, Chris Murman. I'm the redneck from Texas that feels like he doesn't need an introduction. I just started talking, and also joined by the eloquent and soft-spoken Troy Lightfoot. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
See, eloquent and soft-spoken. That's exactly what we can expect from you, Troy.
I'm just putting it on it. I'm just putting it on at this point. Go ahead.
You're a character. You're just playing notes for us. So we're going to talk about mob programming, gang, and we've had mob programming come up on a few previous podcasts. Troy's done some amazing work with Woody Zuhl, who I hug and respect every time I see him. We wanted to kind of take a step back and to say, maybe some of us could go back to some basics as far as mob programming. So we're going to say, what is it? What isn't it? How do we do it? So we're going to kind of get a little deeper into it. Troy and Paul have some extensive experience, and me as someone who's never facilitated mob programming, I wanted to learn from them. So we're gonna kind of have at it. So I'll start with this. And Troy, since you first suggested this title, I'll start with you. What is mob programming, and why the heck would we want to do it?
Okay, so what is it? Well, mob programming is a process that actually is a formalized process of more than two people working on the same problem together. Simplest way I can put it. So Woody describes it as all the brilliant minds working on the same computer at the same time. So that's his quote. Maybe I'm butchering it, but something like to that effect. So that is what it is. So yes, it is three or more people working on a problem together.
Right, and that distinguishes it from pair programming, which is two people. And to correct you, actually, Chris, I don't have mob programming facilitation experience. I have hands-on pair programming experience from earlier in my career, and I'm just as curious to ask Troy, who has done this mob programming facilitation, how to understand the differences with a larger number of people.
Right, and how to really get it started. So
yeah.
Because that was kind of your question, Paul, yesterday when we talked about this at our board meeting, and that was just a general question. So I thought that was a good enough question to have its own podcast, right? So let's talk about that. So why would you do it? So Paul, with your experience, I'll just lean on you for this. I have experience pairing, but you've been around a lot longer than I have when it comes to XP. So with your experience in pair programming, what do you see are the benefits?
Well, pairing was very good, especially when you're pairing somebody a little more junior with somebody a little more senior to have a transference of knowledge. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it was exclusively beneficial to the junior, though. I think everybody benefits from the world of DevOps. Now we talk about shifting things left, shifting tests left, security left, and when I think two people are working on the same problem, that mistake that an individual can make, obviously you made it, you didn't intend to, but you made the mistake. When you're by yourself, it just keeps going, right? You'll catch it later, depending on your approach. Maybe you're doing test-driven development, great, you'll catch it sooner there. But in any case, with an extra human being working with you side by side, you're catching more than just the mundane, like what the editor is going to catch. You're like, where are you going with this? explain that to me, right?
Right. Okay.
What's interesting about that, Paul, is I have zero development experience, but I have a lot of pairing experience. Like I've paired with, when I was a product manager, I paired with other product managers and product owners on our backlogs. I've paired with developers and testers on user stories. And as a coach, I've paired with other coaches, kind of a thing. And I had a director once tell me, hey, I'm okay with this pairing thing, but when I pay for 12 people, I want 12 people's worth of work. And I feel like that's what I feel like that was my first taste of, hey, when we're really writing code or we're really, developing work or creating work, what is exactly one person's work versus two persons work? And it's always a misnomer to kind of tackle that.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult thing that's eluded me my entire career. And I know many people have tried to assess what is the productivity of an individual or even of a team. It's kind of elusive, but I do think it's a mistake to think that it's a multiplier, it's linear. I think by getting the best ideas or catching mistakes sooner, helping each other keep focus, and this is where I imagine I want to ask Troy, when you start adding more people, I imagine the effect is even greater, but there's probably a limit to how many people. Like I wouldn't envision 12 people at a time, but maybe 12 people is cool. But it's not about getting 2x work with pair programming. It's about not making that mistake, not going down that dead end.
So I'll just give a few pointers here about this, and then before we get into the mechanics of it. So in software development and any knowledge and creative work, but we are talking about software development here, but you can use this process for any type of work,
Sure.
actually, which is pretty cool. And maybe at the end we could talk about how to do it non-software development, what are the other use cases. But so knowledge and creative work, the problem doesn't lie in the amount of time it takes to actually type, right? The problem, right. It's a knowledge problem. It's a creativity problem. It's finding a solution problem, right? So for instance, if you were to develop software for 6 hours in a day, if you were to work 8 hours and actually code for that 6, right, by yourself. Now, if you were working on a story, and if you came back the next day and all your code was magically gone and it wasn't backed up or whatever, right? And this scenario, how long would it take you to rewrite that code that took you 6 hours? It probably wouldn't take you 6 hours, if I had to guess.
Right. Because you spend a lot of that time defining the problem, exploring solutions.
Yes.
Right. Now you know the answer.
Correct. So the bottleneck, right. The thing that takes the most time in programming is finding the solution to a problem. So it's not a matter of, so if you can get multiple people, so going back to pair programming, if you have 2 people working on a solution, the odds are you're going to find a solution probably faster, and it might be a better solution because 2 heads who are very smart people looking at the same problem, the one person might miss something, they might not think of something. So it's not so much about how long you spend individually typing at the keyboard or programming, right? It's more about if we can spend more time collaborating, working through a problem together, and in the end, it'll take less time. That's the idea, right?
Right.
And then there's a second part of that when it comes to pairing, is that pairing naturally reduces your WIP. So if you think about how a lot of Scrum teams work, and I'm just picking Scrum because it's the most popular framework, but really any Agile team, but Scrum, people tend to use user stories. So an anti-pattern that I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen, is that the sprint starts and every developer picks up one story, and then every day they meet together and they say, yesterday I worked on this story, today I'm going to work on this story, and then the next day they talk about the same thing, and then a week and a half later they talk about, oh, it's got to be tested and we got to integrate this. Like, okay, and essentially your WIP is pretty much everybody on the team, right? And and that's a common problem. So by pairing, you actually naturally reduce the WIP, which should in turn lead to faster cycle times and to better flow. And also, you're going to build in the quality because you have two minds problem solving together. And the idea is that you're not going to create the problems in the first place, or you're going to do that as least as possible. So by creating less rework and by reducing your WIP and having two really smart people problem solving together, you end up getting good results. So that's essentially some of the benefits of pair programming. And Paul, you brought up another great point about knowledge sharing and about maybe growing out skills on a team, right? There's another part of it. Yep. So that's another benefit when you're pairing people who. So there's a couple ways to go about it. You compare two experts at the same thing, and they could have great results pairing, right? Or you compare an expert with a junior person, and they can have good results, but the junior person is learning something, and maybe the expert is learning something, because just because someone doesn't have as much experience as you doesn't mean they don't have new ideas or good ideas or new ways of doing things, right?
Yeah, or give you a different way of thinking about the problem. Like maybe the understanding of the problem is better in the less technically experienced person. The more technically experienced person could have gone off to the races on the wrong idea, but the more junior technical person saw the problem the way the customer intended it to be seen, right? So there's just value in multiple minds on the same problem. I think you also, avoid some problems when now taking it to the extreme where I don't have the hands-on experience, but I've seen it in mob programming, is you shouldn't have merge conflicts. Like you're all working together. Where's the merge conflict? There shouldn't be any.
Right.
That's a very painful point when you you have N people going off in N different directions and then trying to come together in time to demonstrate the work.
Right.
So you're saying, Paul, that the challenge is sometimes it's not necessarily in the writing of the code. It's it could be in the merging of the code where the real problems ensue. Did I hear you right there?
It's a problem that I would imagine that you don't have. Like if this is the entire team working together on one problem at a time, or maybe dividing that problem up into smaller pieces that maybe there is some merging done, but by and large, I think you've greatly reduced the potential for conflicting lines of code to have to be resolved.
Yeah, I had a tech lead once tell me that 90% of the development time of a single coder, or whatever we want to call them, coder, developer, whatever, is really in the figuring out what to write, and then the last 10% is actually writing it, kind of a thing. So pairing, and now we can expand into mobbing, right? If you can divide the thinking time up between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people or whatever, in a way, Troy, is that really a way to, is that the fastest way to reduce the time of developing a story, in a sense?
Well, let's maybe we can go into, I'm thinking if we should go into the mechanics of how that works so I can explain it, but I'll answer that question. So the question is, you're going to hate this answer. This is a very consultative answer.
It depends.
There's no one right way to develop software.
No, I agree with that for sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is just a technique that may be beneficial for people who want to work in a collaborative.
And if we're good scientists, you should experiment, right? You should find what works for you. But now, if we take the tone that, hey, we're convinced, and we want to know how to get started, talk to us about, one of the questions I have is it necessary to have the big screen, or, is there a practical limit to the number of people to get involved with mob programming? Or how do you even begin? Like, all team environments I've ever been in, regardless of whether it's mob programming or anything, could be traditional PMP style project management situation. There's like a charter. This is what we're up to together. This is how we agree to work together. Do you do stuff like that to get going? And what are some of the common things that might be in there?
So great question. So and since we're talking about Agile teams here, any Agile team should have working agreements, whether it's a team charter, whether that's some kind of document that talks about how we expect to work with one another. And those agreements should be created by the team members themselves.
Right.
And so it's not like the Scrum Master or somebody else creates the agreement. So that's a key point. So I would say if you're going from a team who doesn't pair, who mainly works individually, and you have working agreements, you may have to say, okay, well, if we're going to try this pairing thing or this mobbing thing, we're probably going to have to talk about what are the pitfalls we may run into together, and how do we want to behave there, or what would it look like if this was really successful? Like, what would our behaviors have to be? So, and then talk through that as a team, and then agree upon the things which you want to stick to. So, for instance, with pairing, we'll start there, and then because mobbing is just essentially scale pairing. Right? So,
right.
So with pairing, one of the anti-patterns of pairing is the people who are like checked out, right? So one person is doing all the work. That could be an anti-pattern.
Well, even in pairing, it's pretty sad in pairing if your partner's checked out.
I have seen that. Yes. Somebody is looking on Facebook on their phone, that kind of thing. So,
it's funny with that. Like, sorry to interrupt, but like the interesting about pairing is that, and, like I said, I've paired in other ways than development, or other than the one writing the code. And I think that that's a common thing, regardless of the pairing is, hey, are we both engaged? Are we both equally invested in the result? Right. Which is probably a key, regardless of whether you're doing a pair or you're doing a mob of however many, right? Like, are we all invested? Are we all engaged? Right.
Right. So that is 100% true. So I would say create some working agreements if you don't have them. And particularly if you've never worked collaboratively like this, even in a pair, but even if you are pairing and you say, hey, we want to try to mob, what are the things that we need to do to make sure as a team that we're respecting one another, and not only respecting each other, that we're giving each other equal time to speak, but respecting each other's time. And I'm not going to be disengaged or checked out by going on Facebook or something, right? Like I'm actually going to be a real participant. There's small things like that. It doesn't have to be revolutionary things. That's one thing. So I think maybe what we can do is I'm going to get into the mechanics of how it works, and then we'll go from there if that's okay with you.
There's fundamental roles, and then as you get more advanced, I think there are potentially specialized roles that maybe there's some disagreement about, but it seems like there's a fundamental concept of a driver. You want to talk about like the driver role and navigator?
So where this comes from is a little bit of background. So XP, pair programming, came from XP, for the folks who are new to this. And traditional pair programming, and Paul, please chime in if you have your own experiences that are contrary to what I'm about to say. But traditional pair programming is, Paul, you and I will take a certain amount of time, usually, right? That either a time or a task-based, it could be either one. And you will write some code and I will be observing what you're writing. Maybe I'm taking some notes about it. Maybe I'm chiming in with some thoughts of mine that are happening, right? Also, maybe we do a little prep work together. We talk through what it might look like, maybe some design, something like that. And we kind of go back and forth, either task-based or time-based. Is that generally how you've done it?
Yeah, I honestly didn't do it time-based. It was task-based anytime I did it.
Okay, fair enough. So there's a few ways to do it, but that's we call that traditional pair programming. There's nothing wrong with it. It's really effective. It works. Some of the anti-patterns of that, though, are what I said when it comes to somebody checking out. I've seen that. Or someone's very senior and they know how to solve a problem, so they just do it. And the junior person really doesn't learn much, So there's some potential pitfalls, but if done well, it can be very effective.
Yeah. Now, something that I don't recall being a rule that I've since learned about, I think modern pair programming and mob programming, is the driver navigator concept, which I don't remember being there initially. We're doing this from memory, not from Paul teaches XP modern. Okay. This is something that was happening in the late 90s, right?
Right. So that's like the first one that was created. And then I would say the second one was created timeline-wise was something, and I believe this is true, is something called ping pong pair programming, which is a way to do test-driven development in a pair that's really unique and cool. So the way that works is, Paul, like you and I are pairing, right? So I'm going to go first. I'm going to write the failing unit test. You're going to write the simplest thing to make that thing pass. And then I'm going to refactor it. And then we're going to switch back and forth. And look like we're playing ping pong. So that is very effective. I've seen that work. And that's purely test-driven development based pair programming.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's a third one, this is what mob programming is based off. And so mob programming is actually not based off of traditional pair programming. It's based off of something called strong style pairing, which is created by Lewin Falco. I believe that's how you say his name. And how that works is this driver navigator thing. And yes, and the way that works is if it's your idea in your head, you can't be the one to type it.
Right. He says something like it can't go from your brain to the computer directly. Yeah. It's got to go through another human.
Correct. So the way that works is in a pair setting, and then we're going to talk about how it works with mobbing. In a pair setting, again, you and I, Paul, are going to pair, and I have the idea, and you're typing, and I'm basically telling you what to type. And then okay. So the thing about that is, depending on the skill level, it totally depends on how much I have to tell you. So if you're very experienced, I can just give you a general idea and you can go do it, right?
Right.
If you are brand new to Java development, right, I might have to tell you exactly what to type. And that's also fun, because at that point you're learning, right?
Yeah.
So, but what's going to happen is when we switch, and it's strong style is, my experience is time-based. When we switch, even though you might not know how to type the problem, like you might not know the language, you might not know exactly what to do, you will get time to try to problem solve, figure out the logic though. So you get to think about, how do I solve this problem? I might not know how to solve it in the code, but I'll talk through it with the person who does, and then we'll do it together,
Right.
And then I'll get a chance to go back and have someone problem solving while I'm typing and getting that. So it's back and forth. So that's strong style. So mob programming is strong style pairing, but scaled to 3 or more people. So the way that works is, so we have a concept called a driver and a navigator. So the driver is literally the person at the wheel. They're the person at the keyboard. We're calling the wheel the keyboard, right? The navigator is the person in the passenger seat, or maybe, as we all hate, the back seat, who's telling us what to do, essentially, telling the driver where to go. So that's the concept there. So in mob programming, you pick a time, and this can be part of your working agreement to start off. You pick a time interval, and usually that interval will be different depending on the amount of people in the mob.
Yeah, I imagine it's intense when you're doing this driver navigator thing versus my experience with pair programming early days was more about getting the problem solved with 2 brains.
Correct.
Not this formality of I have to get my thought through your fingers, right? I'm convinced you of what I'm thinking so that you can make it real, or vice versa. That seems a lot more intense. And
it is.
It seems like it's energy intensive.
It is, and I would say one of the things about it when you do it is you need to take breaks after a while.
Yeah.
But when it works well, it's probably the most powerful thing I've witnessed for a team. So let's talk about the mechanics of it, and then how it can work well and maybe not work so well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the driver navigator. So one person. So usually, let's give an example. Let's say there's a 5-person mob, okay, and you have let's say in that mob you have 3 developers and someone who's like does automated testing. Maybe that's their specialty, right?
Okay.
And then somebody else on the team. Maybe it's 2. Maybe it's someone who. Maybe it's a product owner. Maybe it's
somebody who knows the problem space better. Yeah.
Correct. Right. Maybe it's a business analyst. Could be anything. Right. So the way it works is so let's say we're a 5-person mob. What you would generally start with, and this is debatable, but a lot of times it's good to start with like 7 or 10 minutes interval. Okay. So I like to start smaller at first. So let's say 7 minutes. So you need someone to keep track of the time. Now, I encourage when people are first starting the mob to have a facilitator that's going to hold the process and that's going to understand how to help people communicate more effectively, how to facilitate the conversations. because otherwise people tend to go down rabbit holes. It could become ineffective. So I think having a Scrum Master, if you do have a Scrum Master who has strong facilitation skills, they can be a perfect fit for that. It doesn't have to be a Scrum Master though, but a good Scrum Master will tend to have those skills. So,
assuming, Troy, that you've been the facilitator in most of your mobbing situations.
So I've been a facilitator, and then I also usually coach the Scrum Master, and then just let them do it, and then I just observe and help. So one of those two approaches. But I usually kick off the first one, and I'll set the example of how it works.
You'll kick it off as the driver?
No, I will kick it off as a facilitator.
As the facilitator, okay.
Yeah, the facilitator's never the driver, right?
No. But after a while, if the team gets good at the process and gets good at their communication, and that once they're used to it, then you might not need an actual facilitator anymore. That's my experience. The team members might just know how to do it, so that's fine. So the facilitator can always help, but they might go do something else, right? So here's how it works. So let's say 7 minutes as a first example. So let's say actually the three of us. I'm going to scrap the 5-person because we'll just use us on the call. Okay. So let's say, Chris, you're going to be the driver, and I'm going to be the navigator, and Paul's going to be, and there's no title for it really, but it's just a mob member.
Another team member. Okay,
yes, okay.
A mobster.
Yes. So what's going to happen is I am going to tell you, Chris, for 7 minutes what to write, what to type, essentially. Okay. Now, if you're really skilled and if you know how to program in this language, I'll just tell you very generalized things. And again, if you're not, then I'll have to give you more guidance. Either way is totally fine.
You describe intent, right? This is our intent to make this happen.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, let's write a failing test that does this, whatever, right? And then you go and do it.
But now based on skill level, he may say, well, how do I get started writing tests? And you go,
correct.
Okay, well, no, I'll let me explain that to you. But if he's already been doing them plenty, it's like, okay, cool. What's it need to fail at?
Right, exactly. So there's totally different levels of abstraction here that you can work at depending on the skill level.
Right.
So then, Chris, for 7 minutes, you're going to listen to me, and you're pretty much not going to question me. That's actually a key point, because that's a key differentiator, I think, between maybe traditional, is that everyone who's a navigator gets time to not be questioned by the driver. So the good thing about that is an anti-pattern you can imagine if the driver has a lot of experience, that they may not let that more inexperienced person actually navigate them. Right? So we're going to take a short time interval. So in this example, 7 minutes, and we're going to let every person who's a navigator at that time actually navigate. Now, the difference is, Paul, you're in the mob. You can chime in. So it's basically just a driver who doesn't really problem solve, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So if I'm saying, hey, I think we should write a failing unit test that does this, and then Paul, you're just observing, and then you realize that this is totally ineffective, or this is the wrong way to go about it. You can feel free to chime in and give your opinion on that.
So I can question the navigator as well as the driver for not driving, or.
Well, the driver is basically just almost like a receptionist, essentially, or in a way, they're not really problem solving. They're
following the instructions of the navigator to their skill level.
Yes, correct. Yes,
they're driving the code. They're driving the manifestation of all of the ideas.
Correct. So what you want to do is have the navigator lead the problem solving, but have the other people able to chime in and help. So if you have someone who's very experienced as a navigator, right, then you might not hear a ton of chiming in, although it is encouraged to chime in if you think you have an idea, right? But if it's someone who's never done this type of problem before, and it's their turn to navigate, there's a balance between, and that's why I think you need a good facilitator at first, in my opinion. There's a balance between letting that person just totally sink, because you don't want to do that, right? If they just don't know,
right,
then you
got to learn somehow, right?
Right. And so totally overriding them and just doing doing it for them. So there's like a balance, right? So you kind of let them try to problem solve it, and then then they may turn to you and say, Paul, like, does anyone have any ideas? I'm struggling here a bit. So that's a key point, is the psychological safety of this is pretty critical, because you can't have people going like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're doing when you leave them off. You know?
What is it? The Saturday Night Live skit? The IT guy, just move.
Yeah.
Yes.
Put you to the side.
Troy, can I jump in and ask a question here? So that this is a very uneducated question, but I think this drives to the heart of what we're headed to with mob programming, which is, I hear you say we have a driver. I hear you say we have a navigator. Maybe we have a facilitator, depending on the skill level, right? Maybe we don't have a scrum master available, whatever, right? So the rest of the people, if I'm a leader and I'm hearing, well, I have a driver and I have a navigator, like, let's say I jump on board with that. Why do I need all the rest of these people? Like, why are they necessary when they don't have necessarily a role? What do you usually say in those situations?
Well, their role is team member. I mean, so they are, everyone on the team, according to, well, if you're using Scrum as a framework, according to Scrum, is essentially equal when it comes to being a team member. So now they may not be equal in title, that is true, but
sure.
they need to be able to express their ideas. And this is a forum where they can do that. So I'm going to get to, real quick, answer that question. Let me talk about the next part, okay?
Perfect.
I'll come back to that. So after 7 minutes, and maybe this is going to answer your question, Chris. After 7 minutes, the role of the driver and navigator switch to new people. So what happens is you're only a driver and a navigator for that 7 minutes.
Right.
And the 7 minutes is a time I'm picking. I'm not saying you have to use 7 minutes. So after the 7 minutes for this example, let's say that Chris, you were the driver and I was the navigator and Paul was the team member, right? Now we're going to rotate. I'm going to be the team member, and Chris, you're going to be the navigator, and Paul's going to be the driver for 7 minutes. Right?
Yeah, now see, I've stayed engaged the entire time, so I don't have to be brought up to speed. At the very least, I'm up to speed on what the two of you were doing.
You're just swapping out.
Yeah. And if you know, Paul, that you're going to have to navigate, you're going to stay engaged, because you don't want to look like you know.
Right. It's my turn now to take the solution. Probably, well, my understanding is this is more effective at difficult problems. So it's not a 7-minute problem in the first place. It's going to take passing the roles around some number of times before you solve the problem.
Correct.
So you're going to have to stay engaged the entire time.
Yes. And the idea is that every 7 minutes in this example, and I'll give some examples of times I've seen that work well and have it maybe, but every 7 minutes in this example, we're going to switch. So then 7 minutes later, now I'm driving and Paul, you're navigating, and Chris is the team member. So we just keep doing that over and over and over again until we solve the problem. So when I say to solve the problem, I mean really actually finishing the story.
Right.
So a lot of times it doesn't have to be that, but imagine you take a story from no one has touched it to you have tasks, maybe a little bit of analysis, you have development tasks, you have testing tasks, right? And you have deployment, whatever it is, right? You're going to do all that together. That's the idea. So by the time you're done, the story is done. That's the ideal state. That's what it should be.
Right.
So you go from idea to implementation to finishing, and guess what just happened? We had a whiff of lawn on that story, and it's either done or it's in production or whatever our actual end state is for our team, right? And then we move on to the next story. Now, does that mean that the whole team has to work this way? No, it doesn't. Usually, I mean, in my experience, it has been, let's say a team of 8 people. There will be like every story, they will kind of treat a little bit differently. So some stories they want to do a big mob on, whole team. Some stories they'll take 3 people, right? Some stories they'll take 4, some stories they'll just pair on, and they kind of self-organize as it's meant to be, right? Around who's going to work on what stories at what time, right? It's not like every story, all they do all day long is work in a big mob. Now, there are companies who work like that. Like Hunter Industries, I believe, is works pretty close to that. So it really is up to the team. So Chris, going back to your question, yes, there are only 2 technical roles, like driver and navigator, the other 2 team members, but everyone plays those roles who's sitting there. So everyone gets to do the roles very quickly. So some of the reasons why you want to have fast iteration. So some people say, well, 7 minutes seems very fast. Well, it is, but the idea is that there's a couple things. One, if you have someone inexperienced navigating, right, or driving, even worse, I think. So if you have someone who's never programmed in this language before or whatever, right? Do you want them sitting there for an hour, like while you're watching them freaking peck away on the keyboard? Like, no. You're going to give them a little bit of time actually coding it. You're going to tell them how to do it. You're going to teach them, and then they're going to get to problem solve, and then they're going to get to turn again after the rotation. I mean, so one is just a speed and efficiency thing. The second one is, let's say that I'm a senior person and I pretty much think I know how to solve this problem, yet a junior person is navigating me right now. I only have to wait 7 minutes to give my opinion about how to correct this. I don't have to wait 30 minutes. I don't have to wait till the task's done. I can give it. And in fact, when I'm usually the person who's driving that I've seen, a good practice is to let them be the navigator next. And they get to actually, they can refactor the code right there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
The principle of fast integrated learning loops really plays out in this better than anything.
You can do anything but erase the code. That's the rule. So you can say, we're going to refactor all of this that we just did in 7 minutes. That's totally fine. Well, we're going to refactor everything we just did in the last 4 cycles. Fine. If that's what you want to do for your 7 minutes. But you can't go, we're going to erase everything and start from scratch. That can't be like your decision. Okay. So
Right.
that is how it goes. So that's one of the rules. But that's why you want to have it pretty fast iteration. So 7 is usually a good starting point because it's not 2 minutes, but it's enough time to start thinking through some problems and giving you a chance to type and, do some stuff. So 7 to 10, I really would encourage not to do any more than 10 though. That's kind of mine. And I've seen a lot of people do 5 minutes, 5, 7, 10. That would be what I would start with.
All right. So Troy, let's move on to a different aspect of this. And if there's other rules that I've missed, then you can bring them up then. But so let's say, like many teams, right? We're not all located in the same place. Yeah. So how do we make mob programming effective for remote team members?
Good question. Well, I just happen to have a YouTube video which shows how to do this. But
which we can put in the show notes.
That's a show noter, right?
Okay, I can put it in the show notes. But simply put, you use some kind of Zoom or Skype or Teams or whatever you're using, right, to do a video group call, and you do a screen share. And while you're doing the screen share, you basically just do it through screen sharing essentially, and you can control the screen as well, right? So,
let me ask you about that. This is an extension of a question that I've had this session, and that's, so when I first started doing pair programming to show the age, I actually worked on a mainframe, and there was differences in style, but your team had a working agreement to what the style was supposed to be, what the standards were. So the variation was nil.
Mm-hmm.
We all had dumb terminals. We had Fortran code, and there were rules about how to indent and how to name things. And it didn't matter whose machine you were sitting at to do pair programming. You were going to have the same experience. Now, it's crazy. Like, you have different operating systems. People bring their own laptops. Somebody's Mac, somebody's Windows, different IDEs, all kinds of stuff that's different. You may store the code in a Git repo of some kind, but you've got all kinds of things that are just right for you. So does the driver get to bring their own car?
So I would say, again, this would be a team agreement, but because the driver is going to switch very rapidly, it's not like there's one driver, so everyone's going to drive. So you would have to say, okay, for us, the most people here, what's the most comfortable for the most people here, and whatever problem we're about to work on, right? Whatever
So
technology.
you set an environment up for the team is more common that everybody uses same environment?
Yeah, that's one way to do it. I mean, another way to do it is you can rotate if you want team members, like the way they do it. Say, this way we're going to try it the way Paul does it. This way we're going to try it in Chris's ID, and maybe I'll learn from the way Chris does it or Paul does it. You know, that's another way. So again, this is maybe a consultant answer.
but it's a variable. It's one of the things you can try different.
Yes, 100%. Yes. Whatever the team feels most comfortable with. And in fact, my approach to any of these things is we introduce this concept to a team. We say, here are the potential benefits. Here's the problems we're trying to solve. And here's how this process could help you. Here are the pitfalls that you could run into, right? And we could talk about them now maybe. And maybe let's do a workshop. Let's pick one story and let's do it together and see if you like it, you know, kind of thing. And after that, you know, maybe I'll encourage them to try it. But after that, if they don't feel value in it, if nobody likes it on the team, that's totally fine. You know, it's their choice. It's their work. They're self-organizing. I don't think this, just a side note, I don't think this should be imposed on anyone. I don't think pairing should be imposed on anyone. And the reverse is also true. I don't think not pairing and not mobbing should be imposed on anyone. So it's really their choice. I mean, all that matters at the end of the day is that, you know, we have business goals we're trying to achieve and quality goals. And if the team is delivering on those things, I mean, if they do it in pairs, mobs, it's sometimes individually, sometimes a combination of it, who really gives it? I mean, it's up to them. They know how to do the work best. So that's my approach.
Can I just point out before Paul starts talking, I just feel like you need to point out that Paul said the words mainframe and Fortran in a single paragraph. And like for the listeners at home, you should be getting close to closing up your bingo cards for Paul Elia.
Paul, I have to give you a real life example, okay? And I'll tell you how these two worlds collide, what you just said. So at a previous client of mine, I had two mainframe teams doing this. So doing mob programming.
Mm-hmm.
So the worlds, so your old Fortran world and mob programming can collide. And I've actually facilitated sessions with mainframe teams.
Listen, I actually think you have an easier time because things were very disciplined when I first got in the business.
Right.
A lot of things are coming around again. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it rhymes. Right. So the discipline is coming back, and I like what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask about how do you go about, like, this seems very intense. Mm-hmm. How do you go about keeping the energy level up to where this is, I mean, it seems like 8 hours of passing the keyboard 7 minutes at a time could get to be pretty exhausting.
I agree. So my suggestion would be don't start off with doing it 8 hours.
Uh-huh.
Schedule like a 2-hour block.
Okay.
Pick a story and either in sprint planning or your daily planning or whatever, and say, so let's say, I'll give you a couple examples. So let's say you're in sprint planning, right? And you identify a story as a team that you want to try this on, for example. So you'll say, okay, well, maybe that's one of the first stories we're going to work on. So tomorrow or the end of the day today, you know, we're going to schedule a 2-hour block and we're going to just start this process. And you have someone come in and facilitate, you do the whole thing. And then you say either, hey, let's finish this whole story tomorrow like this, or the end, or later today, or let's keep going, or so-and-so, you know, go take it over, or you guys go pair on it or whatever, right? But that's how I would get it started. I wouldn't do an 8-hour block of time. I would do like a 2-hour chunk of time. That's how I usually facilitate it.
Okay. Well, you know, when you have a pretty nasty user story that you're really not sure you've broken down enough in the first place, one of the things that you see a lot is the team will take time to just talk about it for an extended amount of time. So this sounds like a way to, instead of just talking about it, you're actually chipping away at it.
Exactly.
Trying to solve it, right?
100%. And if you're doing TDD, You can try to do that pretty rapidly,
Right.
So that's one of the things that part of my video on YouTube is TDD mob programming, essentially.
Hey, Paul,
So,
can I stop real quick? And only not because you all said something that I disagree with. I want to press on something that I think makes sense to developers, right? It's especially for you, Paul. You said something about this seems tiring, right? So can we pause for those that maybe don't understand the life of a developer and understand the mind of a software engineer? What does that mean to be tiring, right? And how does this session up or increase or decrease the amount of tiring? I really feel like this is for someone like me that doesn't completely uninitiated. What does that mean?
And it's how it's occurring for me. It doesn't mean that it's how it would occur for others. So definitely want to clear that up. But I'm thinking about this driver navigator model where I may see in my head how the problem should be modeled and solved, but now I've got to explain it to somebody else. And a lot of times when I'm in the zone as an engineer, I'm nonverbal. I'm just going to town by myself solving the problem. But now I've got to come to the world of human language and explain it to someone else. And it sounds like it just would take more energy out of you to accomplish that. It takes more energy to accomplish that in my head. And maybe it's not real. Maybe I'm making that up.
I think it completely makes sense. I just want to understand, I want those of us that don't understand the life of an engineer to truly take a second to understand, what does it mean to tire out our engineers? What is that? What is being tired like for them? I mean, for those leaders in the audience, I've never written a line of code in my life. I don't know what it's like for an engineer to be tired. I don't know what it's like to be tired after a session this seems, like Paul said, this seems really, really intense. What is that like? How do we help empathize with our engineers and how do we help make their lives better? So I just wanted to pause there because it seems relevant. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Troy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely have seen it get tiring. And usually that's a good time to go take a break.
Sure.
And in fact, this team, the mainframe team, was two of them particularly, but one of them, they had a little ping pong table, in the cafeteria area, which was on a floor above where they worked at normally. So when they would get tired, they would go play ping pong and hang out and drink some coffee for some time, and then go back to it, and just kind of take their mind off of the work, and then come back to it. So. Yeah, I mean, really, it's up to them. But when they first started, what's funny is when you first start this, it seems really ineffective at first because you're just not used to working that way. But then once you start realizing that as a group, you're actually problem solving, and people who don't have as much experience are actually starting to get it, it's very powerful because they actually want that again. Because then it's I'm not just doing my own work in my own cubicle, right? I'm actually contributing to things that I normally don't contribute to, or I'm getting perspectives that I normally don't get, or I'm getting to give perspectives that I always wanted to give, but I never had the chance to, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I get the thoughts that this seems like it's an expensive way to go about solving the problem, but there's so many other benefits that come with this. We talked about the cross training, but this also creates team ownership of the code, which is a level you really want to reach. You don't want to have yourself subject to someone getting sick and that area of the dark code is a mystery, or somebody leaving the organization and now you're hurting. You really want that team ownership of code on so many different levels, and this is going to accomplish that, it seems.
And I'm going to give you a real life scenario that I've seen, Paul, piggybacking on that. So I've seen teams who do this a lot, and they no longer have many meetings. So teams who hate going to meetings and having a bunch of meetings, if you work this way, you don't really need a lot of meetings, actually. Okay? Your meetings are actually doing the work together. In fact, like daily stand-ups started to become irrelevant after a while.
That makes sense. So why would you need a daily stand-up if you're spending a significant amount of time pairing or mobbing? You're accomplishing the mission of keeping each other informed about what's so right now in the state of the union.
Exactly. And on top of that, or a stand-up might be 5 minutes, and it might be literally, oh, okay, yesterday we didn't finish this, so let's finish it together, and then this group of people is going to finish that thing. Okay. I mean, that's sometimes that's
a huddle. It's really a huddle, right?
Pretty much. And then, and also you don't have to deal with, like you mentioned, merge conflicts, you know? So there's not a lot of overhead or orchestration for that type of stuff. So you save time that way. And in fact, how about, I'm going to go through a small list here of possible things that destroy effectiveness on a team, right? So number one is communication problems. So teams, they don't communicate. The people work in a silo. They only communicate sometimes at the daily stand-up, right? You've probably seen that. So another one is decision-making problems. Another one is gold plating, right? Gold plating the software.
Yeah.
Another one is creating technical debt and quality problems. Another one is too many meetings, right? So it's funny how mob programming with these, and there's other things that I didn't mention here, but mob programming naturally tends to lend itself to better communication, to better decision-making, to not gold plating, right? To having less meetings. And in fact, it's really a great way to be strategic when it comes to growing out your skills on your team and even in your organization. Because imagine you can start doing some like, what do they call in the open space? Chris, remind me. You know, the law of 2 feet, right? And then you have the bees who go and pollinate, right? So one of the things I've seen is when teams start mobbing really well, the other teams kind of take notice of that. And then let's say you have team A and team B. So team A, they have certain skill sets that team B doesn't have. And maybe it starts off with just 1 or 2 people have the skill set, but over time through mobbing, other people on team A start to get some of that skill set, right? And then it's like, okay, someone from team A goes and starts a mob in team B, like for one story in a sprint, right? And they kind of pollinate some of these skill sets, like, oh, let's do it together, you know, like for 2 people on this team, 2 people on that team or whatever. And they do it together. And then it's like, oh, now you're also growing out the skills, not only in your team, but in your, if you're using SAFe or something in your art, or even beyond that in your organization, right? So it can be a pretty strategic way to reduce bottlenecks. If you're looking at a systemic view, right? Reduce bottlenecks, increase your cycle time, actually can save you money because you won't have to keep hiring people, because you won't have to say, oh, we don't have that skill set. We just have to keep hiring people. And then people leave and then you have to hire more people. If you can look at the problem as a skill set problem and not a people problem and use this process and technique, it can be pretty strategic. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Am I saying it's the only way or the end all be all way of working for everybody? No, I'm not. I'm just saying for people that like working collaboratively, it's probably the best option. If you are a loner and you don't like it, maybe it is not. I mean, everybody's different. So that's my take on it.
So gang, I think what we're covering is that this is a topic that we thought would take a very short period of time to discuss, and this is a very meaty subject. So maybe we can revisit this in yet another episode. But I think that we've uncovered some really interesting ideas around mobbing. So I guess Troy, Paul, what's something that you didn't get a chance to touch on that you really want to kind of leave as a final thought?
Paul, you want to go?
You actually just touched on it right towards the end. I was wondering about introverts, right? There are people that I've encountered throughout my career. I've not been one of them. I guess I'm more extroverted, but that really just want to have their piece and want to go away and come back with their solution. Mm-hmm. How do you provide the space for that member of your team that feels more that way? Do you say, hey, you don't have to play in the mob programming, it's not required, and you're still a member of the team, and how do you do that?
Well, I've seen this happen. So there was a team I can think of with somebody like this in particular. I have their face in my head here. I could just picture them, right? So, and they were pretty reluctant to doing it, and we told them, like, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Like, it's an option. And they had decided to join in one day. And in fact, some of the things they added to that mob session were like almost revolutionary for some of the people.
They're often very good people, and if you could get their ideas,
right. Like people were kind of like blown away actually by some of the things that were coming out of
great.
Mouth. And I think they really, really enjoyed that actually, because they were seen by their peers as the person that was the expert, and that was kind of really blowing people's minds. And so they naturally kind of, not saying they were in every mob session, but they were in quite a few of them. And
that's cool.
Nobody told them they had to do it,
That's good.
So again, it's like respect for people. I mean, coming back to that, and respect for people, as a coach or as a scrum master, or if you're a manager listening to this, if you want to try to encourage your teams to do this, they, like any change in life, people are going to be resistant to it especially when it starts getting hard. And we have to respect that, but all we can do is show them the value. So I think that's the key. Show them what the potential value of this is, how it could benefit their teams, what are the potential pitfalls, and we've talked about some of them today. What are the things to look out for and avoid? And then let them try it out. And you might have to do some encouragement. You might have to do some facilitation. You might have to say, hey, we did it once. It wasn't great. Let's try it at least one more time. Let's really give it a fair try, because sometimes the first time is not going to be great, obviously. So, but
it's an invitation for sure. It's not a, you wouldn't advise a team make it compulsory.
Correct. And after that, if the team goes, you know what, I hate this, but let's try pairing, that's also a win. So either way, so maybe what's funny is I was co-training a certified Scrum Master course with a good friend of mine, Dave Pryor, one time, and somebody I did a whole section on mob programming, and which is not part of the curriculum, but I just brought it up, and I showed a video of a day in the life of mob programming in the class, and one of the pieces of feedback I got was anonymous feedback. And it said, the mob programming video scared the hell out of me. That's what it said. But I think we'll try pairing. Got them to pair.
What a billboard for mob programming. Hey, at worst, the worst case scenario is we scare you into mob or to pairing.
To pair.
So, Troy, I'm curious of this, and this is more of like a holistic sense of mobbing as opposed to mob programming kind of a thing. So I'm curious, what have you learned most about maybe mobbing in general, as opposed to what you thought about it going in, right? So maybe that could be related to just what are the aspects of working in a larger group on a single piece of code or a single problem kind of a thing. Like what have you learned that surprised you the most since you started doing this?
Well, that surprised me. Okay, how quickly people got it. I was shocked at that when I first started trying it out. Like I thought it would be really painful, and it usually is for the first 30, 45 minutes in my experience. But after that, it starts to click. Like once somebody really, I think part of it is people just don't believe that someone is going to uphold those time boxes. So like, I think people's natural reservation is we're going to get in here as a big group. Somebody's going to take over. You know what I mean? Like, so if you have someone who's really holding the process and they see that, oh, they're serious about this, like we literally have to switch every 7 minutes, okay? And I'm going to have to problem solve. That tends to drive the engagement. And then people like that because people want to contribute to problems, to problem solving. So I think that was my biggest surprise, is how quickly, if you uphold the process, how quickly people kind of get into it. And I would say one of my biggest learnings so far is usually, two things. One is trying to prevent people from going down rabbit holes and arguing about solutions. So what'll happen is, let's say Paul and I are really experienced, and Chris, you're not as experienced at you just said at software development, for example, right? So let's say Paul and I are I'm navigating and Paul's a team member, and I have a solution in my mind, right? And then I'm telling you what to type, Chris. And then Paul, very senior, and he has a totally opposite way of doing it, right? So he's free to chime in and say, hey, what about doing it this way, right? That's fine. But what you don't want to happen is the whole 7 minutes is spent Troy and Paul discussing what the best solution is.
Right.
The best approach is it's only a very short amount of time. So Paul chimes in and says, this is my solution. And I say, you know what, Paul, that's probably better than mine. Or
let's give it a go, right?
Yeah.
Be open.
Yeah. Or you know what, let's try mine just for 7 minutes, right? And Paul,
Right.
you're up next. And if you don't like this approach, feel free to refactor, like try a different way. And that's totally fine. And I think that the thing I learned from observing these things, because sometimes when you first start, people go down these rabbit holes, they waste a bunch of time. So that's why a facilitator is good to help drive these conversations. Like, hey, guys and gals, like, let's just try the navigator solution for 7 minutes if you can't come to an agreement, right? And then when it's your turn, feel free to change it up. That's totally fine. And then by the time that person comes back around, there's usually a pretty fleshed out solution. And then Paul would get a chance when it's his turn. And if he really believes that his solution is better, to sit there and explain why and get it done, right? And then I go, oh, you know what, Paul, like I didn't think about it that way. That's probably true. I mean, there's not everything is going to be perfect, obviously. But I
imagine you're going to have to retrospect on the entire experience and change some things up. Try some new things.
Yeah. So as a facilitator, when I first start these, like, I usually do a workshop first with a team before I would do the real work. Like, I'll do like an example problem and show them.
Don't get into the right. Exactly. Learn the mechanics on something like the online web store example of Common or whatever.
Right. And then what I'll do is at the end, we do a little retro, like a 10-minute retro, right? About the process and what was working, what didn't. And if we have to make working agreements about this, what would that look like? Stuff like that.
Yeah. Now that you've played a game with it, how do you want to do it for real?
Correct. And then when you do it for real, especially after the first time, talk about that, like what went well, what could be better, things like that. And then really just the first few times, you may have to do some small, mini retros. And then as you kind of get into a groove, you won't need them as much.
Perfect.
Yep, it's all cool. I mean, I know we could talk about this. We keep going. Chris trying to reel us in.
Yeah, well, we're kind of getting to our time box, but as with any subject that Troy explores with us, we're realizing there's always more to explore. So don't be surprised if you hear more of mob programming coming up in the future. Or, really, this is a topic this idea of many people working on a single problem that may not be related to just developing software. It could be to solving problems of any shapes or sizes. So I think that we could revisit this again, but for now, maybe we should sign off. Any final thoughts, gang, while we're leaving them out?
No,
our standard spiel or the elements to it. You want to give that a go?
Yeah, I was giving us a
Channel RJ.
Finding us on Agile Uprising, talking with us on the Coalition website, coalition.agileuprising.com, finding us on Patreon if you'd like to contribute to the podcast well-being. There's any manner of at Agile Uprising on Twitter. I'm probably not doing this as polished as Jay, and I like it that way because Jay
exactly.
Jay's gotten too comfy because screw him. So if you're still listening, Jay, screw you.
We intended to poke you, and we've done a good job. I hope you agree, Jay.
Yeah, exactly. For Troy Light, for Paul Elia. I am Chris Murman. Thank you so much for this chat on mob programming. We will chat with you again in the future.